you. Good afternoon, everyone. To continue from where we left off, and then hopefully leaving a lot of time for questions. We went through suggestions of our text in the middle of page 16 of potential emphases in practice based upon one's personality type. And the one that we didn't get to this morning was jealousy. The jealous, childishly resentful of others, should examine their own minds and rest in relaxation. So the basic recommendation here is to scrutinize your own mind, as described yesterday, and then rest in relaxation. Now, why relaxation for jealousy? It may help to look a little bit at the Tibetan word for jealousy. Of course, we've all experienced it at one point or another. It could be professional jealousy. We could be jealous of another person's wealth, appearance, power, family, professional accomplishments, degrees, house, car, it doesn't matter. The Tibetan word tak means kind of a space, can be like a crack between rocks and so on, and do means narrow. So it means kind of like it's very similar to the word we use in English, narrow-mindedness, but it's much more specific. It means that your attitude toward whatever you are jealous about and whomever you are jealous of is completely devoid of space. You can't stand the thing. You are, as we would say, between a rock and a hard place. So the nature of jealousy, according to this analysis, is a kind of narrow-mindedness where you are not allowing yourself the space to accommodate whatever it is you are jealous of. So, for example, as I find myself getting older, I can feel twinges of jealousy whenever I'm in crowds of young people who have their whole lives in front of them and who, we all looked wonderful when we were young. And no matter how wonderful you looked when you were young, by the time you get to my age, 66, you don't look the way you did then. And that can be painful, And so when I'm around like crowds of young people having fun, I can see a twinge of resentment, a twinge of resentment. And when you look at that, to look at it, it has to happen. So, but when you look at that, if you look at it, it's the nature of it is narrowness of focus. Because you're ignoring, by focusing on one specific attribute, you're ignoring the whole situation, the whole universe, the whole world. So, for example, sometimes, let's say I'm walking through, the trendier area of Williamsburg, and I see all these young people having so much fun. And as Ilya can attest, initially I found that very upsetting. I would actually get upset. And it took me a while to admit that it was jealousy. It was jealousy. I was jealous of the freedom and the careless, carefree nature of youth. But if you actually look at the context, not just the immediate impression, because I know nothing about those people. These were complete strangers to me. For all I know, one or more of them could have less than an hour to live. They're mostly coming out of bars, which means that they're drinking. If they're going to drive, well, they're in New York City, so they're probably not going to drive. But, anything can happen. And I don't know that. And I was never exactly like that, because by that age I was in retreat. But still, I was that age once, and I made my choices, just as they are making my choices. And since I don't regret my choice to go into retreat instead of hanging out in clubs and whatever they had back then. It was the late 70s. It wasn't the way it is now. What did we have? Discos? Ugh. Anyway, it looks better now. I don't know if it is. I don't regret my choice. And you can't have everything. You make a choice and you live with it, you accept it. So it's not a simple matter of just looking. You could also do that. You could look at jealousy and see that it's the wisdom of accomplishment, but he's not saying that here. He's saying just relax, look at the broader context, look at the whole thing, and look at your mind. As well, rest openly in simple, self-arisen, naked seeing, without fixation or concepts, in the self-liberation of whatever appears now, in the next life, or in between. Now, this is in general, referring to any of the kleshas or no klesha at all. If you allow your awareness, which is the defining attribute of mind, if we were asked what is the difference between a mind and that which is not a mind, the difference is obvious. A mind is aware. So mind is awareness. The nature of mind is emptiness. The nature of everything else is emptiness. But the attribute, defining attribute of a mind is that it is aware. Now, I don't know for certain if inanimate objects are aware or not. Generally speaking, we tend to assume that they're not, and that may be true. Similarly, I'm never too sure about plants. People talk about plants as though they're not aware. I'm ill at ease with the assumption because I'm just not sure. And especially when it comes to strange things that are in a whole different kind of kingdom, like some fungi, like mushrooms and so on, that seem to have massive systems of intercommunication. I don't feel personally confident saying that they're not aware, but I don't know, and I'm not a scientist, so I'm not required to know. But the point is that if they are aware, they have mind. If they have mind, they're aware. And anyway, I have a mind, so I'm aware. And the thing that we can do is simply allow your awareness to be aware of itself. And that really summarizes everything we've done over the last 2 days, everything we've seen. Because in the end, as I mentioned this morning, what we are concerned with here is Rikpa Kerde, the sole pursuit of awareness. If your mind is at rest in its natural awareness, is aware of itself, you can't mess up too badly. Now, the difficulty, of course, is habit. Simply identifying your mind's awareness and being able to remain cognizant of it. So in other words, letting that awareness be aware of itself, which is, as Trungpa Rinpoche said, and I quoted him yesterday, something your mind just has the ability to do. It just does, something minds can do. So doing that, learning how to do that, is not going to prevent, in itself is not going to prevent the distraction that comes from habit. Distraction would not occur without habit. We have the habit of distraction, and that's why we become distracted by shiny things, as people say. I'm easily distracted by shiny things, literally and figuratively, you know. Bright colors, especially colors that I like purple and orange. Like, I really, really like the color of Tom's jacket. And as I was, you know, looking at people to make sure people are awake and seem to be understanding, I was distracted because I just looked at the jacket and instantly my mind said, good color, like, you know. So, yeah, I know, right, yeah. And that's habit. There's nothing, that's not a serious or particularly malign example, but it's the same process that can lead to the bigger problems. So all of the highfalutin language, like the self-liberation of whatever appears now in the next life or in between, it can be intimidating, these terms, like arising upon, liberation upon arising, self-liberation, and naked liberation, primordial liberation. There are 6 different types, typically 3, and they're all highfalutin. The key to approaching them is not necessarily memorizing the terminology or even understanding it. Even if you don't understand a single word of that terminology in any language, the key is learning how to allow. It's really a process of allowing your awareness to be aware of itself. And it's a process analogous to the process of learning to ride a bicycle. You can't learn to ride a bicycle by reading about it. You could read about descriptions about the muscle groups involved and the development of balance and how quickly to push on this and pull on that and so on, and that wouldn't do it. It wouldn't even help. So essentially what we get out of texts like this is not so much a detailed description of how to do it, but the encouragement to do it. And the encouragement comes from the statements of great masters like Khenchen Trungpa Rinpoche, whom I quote frequently, that if you have a mind, you have the ability to do this. He used to go further. He used to go around saying, everyone can practice Mahamudra. People with prior training who've gone through the preliminary practices and other practices can practice Mahamudra. People without prior training who haven't gone through the preliminary practices and other practices can practice Mahamudra. He said, everyone can practice Mahamudra, therefore everyone should practice Mahamudra. Mahamudra is not dangerous. You won't go insane from practicing Mahamudra. You won't have other problems. It won't cause you physical problems, and so on. What Rinpoche was emphasizing with his really carefully chosen repetition was the fact that ultimately what we are concerned with here what Telopa taught Naropa, as referenced in our lineage supplication, what Shri Singha taught Guru Rinpoche, Guru Padmasambhava, as referenced in this text. What we are concerned with is not something extraneous to ourselves, nor something particularly esoteric. It is just something we don't talk about, which is the fact that since awareness is the defining attribute of a mind, and since awareness can be aware of itself, although we almost never use our awareness that way, we use it to be aware of other things. You always can choose to allow your awareness to be aware of itself. And making that choice initially involves effort, because the effort is not letting the awareness be aware of itself, but being willing to do something different, to being willing to do something that is not habitual. But according to great masters like Nyosho Khenwa Rinpoche, who was one of Mingyur Rinpoche's 4 root gurus, actually doing it is restful. It is not effortful. Getting yourself to do it may be where the effort is involved. And it's restful because it's natural. Minds weren't made, but if they were, it would be what your mind was made for, what your mind was designed to do. Your mind wasn't designed by anyone. But now, what about death? We next turn to death. When such a yogi dies, he or she should turn their mind into an ah syllable and send it into their guru's heart. As both Bardor Rinpoche and Lama Tratop have emphasized again and again and again and again and again, I'll stop there. In spite of all of the complex, elaborate, sophisticated, even Baroque techniques we have surrounding dying, the most effective, the most powerful, the most reliable, and conveniently the easiest is simply the thought of your root guru. If at the moment of death you are thinking with your last conscious thought of your root guru, with appreciation, with devotion, with gratitude, then that's enough. That will do everything. That's enough. It doesn't matter how much practice you did or didn't do. I mean, it does matter in general, but if you can think of your root guru with devotion with your last thought, then even if you didn't do a lot of practice, you are fine. It doesn't matter how many mantras you said, how many texts you memorized, how many different sadhanas you practiced day in and day out. It doesn't matter whether you got up early every morning or didn't, whether you were rigorous about not watching television and staying away from social media, or watched television and engaged with social media. It doesn't matter whether you fulfilled all your aspirations or not, as long as the last thing on your mind, your conscious mind, as you lose consciousness, is your root guru, that is enough. That is it. They can also accomplish superior transference just through the indivisibility of their mind and their guru. If the interval or bardo appearances arise, know that there is no bardo that could appear that is anything other than your own mind. Now, how do you know that? What do you base that confidence on? Very simple. You're dead. You're dead. Your senses don't work. Your consciousness may not have left your body, but you don't have working eyes, ears, nose, and whatnot. So therefore, anything you see is definitely within your own mind. In fact, everything we see now is within our own mind, but it's doubly true in the bardo, for the very simple and undeniable reason that you're dead. Now, the problem beings have, because that makes it sound very easy, is that often we don't know we're dead. And we don't know we're dead because we have the strong habit of not being dead. And so it's, again, as we've seen, the problem is assumptions. A friend of mine who is a long-time Buddhist practitioner and translator, before he was Buddhist, studied with I guess a kind of psychic or visionary who actually could see what dead people experience. There are people who can do that. And he asked that teacher, what do people do? And his teacher said, they get up and go to work. Because they think they're still alive. That's why when we read the texts on the Bardo, we read all this stuff about you trying to talk to your family, and they don't answer you, and they don't pay any attention to you, they ignore you, and they're sad, because they know you're dead. You're the last person to know, usually. So one of the things about dream yoga is if you, it's said that if you have at least 7 lucid dreams in your life, you stand a good chance of being able to know you're dead when you're dead. Otherwise, it may take you a while. And if you know you're dead, that's good, because then you can do something about it. You can't bring yourself back to life, hopefully, but you can, you can again think of your guru, and then that will. Thoughts themselves are the interval, the bardo. We use this term bardo commonly, most commonly, to talk about the period between death and rebirth. And but the bardo means an interval, which is why I translate it as interval here. But there are all kinds of intervals. And ultimately, as Jöngon Lodro Tai wrote in his Liberation of the Three Realms, any state other than the immersion in the primordial ground is a kind of bardo. So right now, we are experiencing the bardo between birth and death. And when we dream, we're experiencing the bardo of dream in addition to that, within that. And when we're meditating, we experience the bardo of meditation. Now, if you fall asleep during meditation and have a dream, you're in 3 bardos at once. You're in the bardo of dream, within the bardo of meditation, within the bardo of this life. And then there's the bardo of the time of death, which is between, normally it's said between being struck by the fatal illness and death, but it's actually the process that it starts slow and then accelerates. So it's your body's gradual shutdown. And then there's the Bardor of Dharmata, which we talked about, which is the pure appearances, and then the Bardor of becoming, which is when you arise in a mental body and start to look for a physical body and go through various hallucinations and whatnot. So when he says, when Guru Rinpoche writes, thoughts themselves are the Bardor, recognize that each and every thought is itself a type of Bardor and a cause. If you're able to experience the process of falling asleep, which I think is called hypnagogia, you will at some point have experienced the transference or the transformation of thoughts into dreams. At a certain point, the thoughts you have as you're becoming intoxicated by sleep, it's a kind of intoxication because the functions of your mind shut down. It's similar in some ways to strong alcoholic intoxication. I can't compare it to drug intoxication because I don't have that much experience, or any really. But your mind becomes intoxicated by the descent into sleep, and your thoughts, therefore, are less, it's not that they're less controlled, because our thoughts are normally not controlled. They become seemingly less coherent and less interrelated, less logical. So something that often happens to me is that because my senses are shutting down, I'll have the idea that a sound is a color, or a color or shape is a time, or something. Concepts will get muddied. The concepts and abstractions we have, like sound, color, shape, time, so that at that point, if you can still be a little bit aware, that's when the thoughts themselves will start to turn into hallucinations, what we call dreams. And dreams basically are thoughts that you take to be real because you're intoxicated by sleep. You're out of it, sleep is like an intoxicant, a necessary intoxicant on which our health depends, unlike other ones on which our health does not depend. And it's as you start to really lose conventional waking awareness, then you're very much fooled by your own thoughts in a double way. So that's why Tibetans call dream nyingtru, or kind of like double delusion or extra delusion. I'm fooled by my thoughts right now because I take them seriously. There's even a bumper sticker about that. Don't believe everything you think. But in dreams, we're doubly fooled because we think of something and then we see it and hear it and we think it's real. And so that is another key we're taught to traversing the interval. Knowing that fosters self-awareness. At best, you will gain freedom in the interval, the Bardor. Intermediately, you will recognize the Bardor's nature and be liberated. At least, your habits will be gradually exhausted. You will recognize yourself and will achieve liberation. So, what this means is that if you die with the thought of with the devoted thought of your guru in mind, then hopefully that will, the momentum of that will cause you to actually see your guru, whether they're alive or dead, doesn't matter, in the bardo, recognize that you want to be with them in their presence, and you'll dissolve into the guru. And then that's it. Then you will achieve liberation. If not, if you have a strong habit of devotion to a deity, like it could be Amitabha, or Avalokita, or Tara, or Vajrakila, or Yamantaka, or Vajrayogini, and through the habit of meditating on that deity every day, ideally at the same time, but it doesn't have to be. At some point in the bardo, you might, even though you don't know you're dead, you might think, oh, it's time to meditate on Avalokita, or it's time to meditate on Tara, and you'll have the thought of that deity, and you might actually see that deity as a result. And then that will also, if you dissolve into the deity, then you'll achieve birth in that deity's pure realm. Every deity has their own realm. And, you'll have several, in short, you'll have several opportunities, but it depends upon your training now. So it's a good idea to get in the habit of every time you're surprised or frightened to call on your guru. Because if you die suddenly and you call on your guru, that's still going to be a good death. Now, we are not wandering yogic vagabonds. You cannot be, it's pretty impossible to be that in this country at this time. It wasn't always impossible, but when it was possible, they didn't have Buddhism here yet. They had Christianity, but you could be Johnny Appleseed. You could just, in some cases, you could wander. And there are other countries where you can still do that, where people do. There are sadhus in India and people in other countries who people will feed them, people will treat them with respect in many cases. And in parts of Tibet, certainly, you can still do this. The government can be a little bit of a problem, apparently, but otherwise, you're okay. So here, Guru Rinpoche talks about that. Yogis who wander aimlessly should cultivate strong discipline and offer their aggregates as a feast. So if you're going to be wandering from place to place, as Palchen Rinpoche did, as Jetsun Milarepa did, then you should practice severance regularly, which is part of the discipline. Without conceptual direction, bring whatever you encounter to the path. If you are struck by illness or contagion, meditate on the guru at the site of your ailment as a remedy for heat or cold. Traditionally, Tibetans think of illnesses as being heat illnesses or cold illnesses. So an infection is a heat illness. I'm not quite sure what cold illnesses are. But anyway, you would imagine your guru in a form that is the antithesis of the symptoms of your ailment. Dissolve the illness into him, generate pure outlook and the fortitude of willingness to be ill or die. When you're seriously ill, and he's talking about a situation where you may not have access to medical treatment, but even now when we do, they say it's very important not to, and this is very, very hard, not to be unwilling to be sick. I can give you an example with a minor mental illness I have an anxiety disorder. So when I look at the anxiety, at the moment, it doesn't exist as such. It's there, but it doesn't, it's different. I can't explain it. The problem, of course, is I can't do that forever. I can't look at the anxiety forever. But that won't work if I think that by looking at the anxiety, I'll get rid of it. As soon as I try to use the technique of looking directly at the anxiety in order to get rid of it, it doesn't work. That's the point being made here. If you are menaced by hunger and thirst, dispel them by meditating on overpowering the elements and on the nutrition of space. All removal of impediments and all progress depend only on devotion for your guru, confidence in their instructions, and the purification of obscurations. For example, if threatened by enemies, meditate on your guru above your head, facing your enemies. If you then pray devotedly without a moment's doubt, you will be freed from danger. This can be applied to brigands as well. This depends on how much faith you have, obviously, and how much devotion. But basically, the point being made here is valid for everyone. Devotion for your guru, prayer to your guru, is the answer to everything. If you have trouble meditating, pray to your guru. If you feel sick, pray to your guru. If you're being persecuted, pray to your guru. If you're experiencing an interpersonal disharmony, pray to your guru. Because if that doesn't work, nothing else will. And the reason for this is very simple. Everything else, all other deities, all other methods, are just varieties of the thought of your guru, prayer to your guru. That's why in the Tantra of the Array of Ati, Dzogchen Tantra, it says, better than imagining 100,000 deities for a kalpa is to think of your guru for a single moment. Better than reciting 100 million mantras over a kalpa is to pray to your guru just once. Because all the other things derive their power, their authenticity, their genuineness from the guru. The reason for this is very, very simple. This is all about Buddha nature. Everyone has Buddha nature. All we're trying to do here is discover it and remove whatever debris we need to in order to be able to discover it. But we have such a long-standing habit of self-disparagement that it is much easier to recognize Buddha nature in the guru than in yourself. For two reasons. The first reason is that if your guru is an authentic guru, they have recognized their own Buddha nature and therefore can manifest its attributes to some extent in their words and deeds, which gives you a clue as to what Buddha nature is like. The second reason is that the guru taught you about Buddha nature Therefore, when you think of Buddha nature, you associate it with your guru. So the quickest way to Buddha nature, which is the source of all your strength and all solutions to all problems, is through your devotion to your guru. If in this way you exert yourself throughout your life in the essence of the accomplishment of the guru, you will acquire all the qualities of the 5 paths and 10 stages. It is absolutely certain that Buddhahood will appear in the palm of your hand. Write down this profound outline of the completion stage, which includes my experiential advice. Conceal it as treasure for the benefit of beings in the future. And then the text ends with Yeshe Tsogyal's colophon. She wrote it down based on Guru Rinpoche's instructions, and then what follows after that is Terchen Barway Dorje's colophon about how he discovered this. This text, like all of the Guru Vidyadhara sadhanas cycle and the 4 Ayu sadhanas, longevity sadhanas cycle, and the many other parts of his terma, I think the peaceful and wrathful deities of the spacious expanse, and maybe also the Avalokiteshvara cycle that we received last year. All of these came from scrolls that fell from the roof of a cave. At one time, it was in the year 1887, Terchen Barway Dorje was celebrating the Guru Rinpoche 10th day with a feast with 25 of his own disciples. So he was 51. Tibetans would say 52, because he was in his 52nd year. And during the feast, he, at a certain point, there was a loud crack. And they heard also the Guru Rinpoche mantra sounding. And then there was this loud crack, and all of these parchment scrolls fell down from the ceiling of the cave. The cave is still there. I'm sure Lama Trotop has been there many times. It's called the Cave of Protection. And some of them were legible, the symbol script, and some of them were, the ink had vanished and were not legible. And so what Terchen Barway Dorje did with the illegible ones was they had a fire in the cave. He pretended that he was intoxicated and threw the illegible scrolls into the fire and then made sure he breathed in the smoke. As a result, they appeared to his mind clearly. So in other words, he turned the illegible script into smoke that he then breathed in, and that was how he received those parts of the treasure. But many of them were legible. And so a lot of the practices, I would say at least 3 or 4 of the 9 volumes come from those scrolls. Okay, so it's 2:47. We have an hour and a quarter for any questions you'd like to ask. And please use the microphone when you ask questions.
Thank you for these teachings, Lama Yeshe. I had a question about the final part about absorbing the essences of the elements. Is that Chu Len? Is that called Chu Len, or is
Yes. Yeah, Rasayana, Chu Len.
Rasayana. Okay.
These are some of the practices in this text are very approachable, and some of them are very advanced. And Chu Len is an advanced one.
I have a question from the internet. Norjin Hamo.
Oh, okay.
In the section about apathy, you mentioned undifferentiated awareness. Could you please explain what that means?
The awareness that is the defining attribute of your mind, as it is of any mind, unlike the functions of mind, which can be separable into one thing and another thing, the awareness itself does not have parts. It's not composed of smaller things. It's not divisible. So it is homogeneous, undifferentiated. Chalwa is the Tibetan word. Even, not indivisible. Okay. Now one from the room. Yes. Yeah, Kathleen. You don't have to get up. Make him do the work. Well, what?
Thank you so much. So with all this awareness that I'm so aware of, what am I to do with it? On the Dharma path, on the bodhicitta path, on every single thing I do, what is my job as a human being?
We do, in this tradition, on this path, we do two types of practice. What we could call directed practice or guided practice, and undirected practice. The generation and conscious cultivation of bodhicitta, the accumulation of merit through the mandala offering and whatever other means, the prostrations and so forth, meditation on deities and repetition of mantras, supplication or prayer, all of these are a directed practice because we are directed in that practice to do something specific. There is a specific thing to do and pay attention to. Now, such practices do not necessarily prevent someone from doing them and simultaneously resting in awareness. But in order to do them and rest in awareness, in self-awareness, you need to have first learned to rest in self-awareness just by itself. So for most of us, when we're doing directed practice, we are not actually resting in awareness of awareness, because we are aware of something else. We're imagining, we're using our imagination, we're thinking, and so on. The other type of practice we do, undirected practice, is what's described at the end here, where you allow your mind's awareness to be aware of itself. And that's different from merely being aware of your mind. Awareness of awareness is different from awareness of mind. The difference is like, well, I don't want to use an analogy because analogies are no good. But anyway, so that is undirected practice, or practice without an external focus of any kind. So most of the time that we spend practicing, we're doing directed practices. So we're not necessarily actually resting in awareness. We're using mind. And they divide it into Semlam Dujepa and Yeshelam Dujepa. Semlam Dujepa is taking the mind, the conceptual mind, as path, and Yeshelam Dujepa is taking wisdom, or original wisdom, as the path. Anytime that we're doing a meditation practice that involves thinking or imagining something, we're taking the mind as path, not wisdom, not original wisdom. But there's still value in doing that, because all of these things maneuver us into a position where ideally, because of circumstances and the accumulation of merit and the mindset we've developed, we can't help but encounter the nature of our minds. Okay, now we could have one from the internet.
This is from Susan Beckley. Is lucid dreaming recognizing you are dreaming, like watching a film and knowing you are in the theater?
In some ways, yes, and in some ways, no. But because you recognize, well, it depends on how solid your lucidity is. You can be lucid in the dream and then lose. There are four things that can happen. You can, especially if it happens in light sleep, which is a little easier to gain lucid dream per se is easier when it's a dream that happens more in a lighter state of dream sleep. But then what can happen is it can wake you up, especially if you get excited. Oh, I know I'm dreaming, wow, and then all of a sudden you wake up. If you are in a deeper, obviously you have to be in what's called REM sleep, dream sleep. If you're in a deeper state, it's harder to gain lucidity to begin with. And then if you lose it, you probably don't wake up. You probably just lose the lucidity and start believing the dream. And then there are other things that can happen too. But basically, so it's a little bit like being in a movie theater and a little bit not. Yes, Matt.
I wanted to ask about the importance of, let's say, aspirations. Even like on a small daily level, day-to-day thing, like trying to counter some of the habitual thought patterns we have, such as I can't, because for me, that's a big one. When I can't be aware.
Mm-hmm.
I try to say I can. And for various other things, like I can do this, it's not as bad as this, as I think. Would you say as a rather indirect way of working with thoughts to kind of ease them, like ease their solidity, is that a good reminder and a good thing to do? Like a quote unquote mantra, like I can do this, this is possible, things are not as bad, so on and so forth.
We're taught that the aspirations we make are as important to our path as learning to drive is. when you own a car, you have, or have access to a car, you have a piece of technology that, if it's gassed up, has the potential to take you somewhere. You need to learn to drive in order to get where you want to safely, and not get where you don't want to, or unsafely. The gas itself is not enough. You have to know how to steer. The gas, in the analogy of driving, is an analogy for the merit we accumulate in practice. Learning to drive and driving safely is an analogy for our aspirations. If you make good and proper aspirations using whatever merit you have accumulated, you will move in the right direction. Depending upon how much gas you have, you may get all the way there or only part of the way there, but you won't be taking the wrong path. If you fail to make aspirations, no matter how much gas in your car there is, you'll be like someone who's pressing the accelerator but never touching the steering wheel. There is no guarantee where you'll end up. When there are extremely powerful people in the world who do bad things, it's because they accumulated merit in a previous life but made the wrong aspirations. So aspirations are extremely important, and that's why every lineage of Tibetan Buddhism, the best known are, of course, the Gelugpa tradition and the Karma Kagyu tradition, but every lineage does this, has major aspiration festivals where every year, and they always do it in Bodh Gaya, if they can, Vajrasana. They build temples or enclosures. They used to do it at the Bodhi tree itself, but now I don't think that's possible anymore because of security concerns and so on. But if we can, we go to Vajrasana, to Bodh Gaya in Bihar, to make these aspirations, because by doing it at the site of what Buddhists traditionally regard as the greatest thing ever done on this planet, which was Buddha Shakyamuni's achievement of Buddhahood under the Bodhi tree there, where that magnificent stupa was later built by Nagarjuna. We believe that whatever aspirations we make will be very powerful and will take effect. And so we chant the traditional aspiration scriptures of the sutras, such as the aspiration of Samantabhadra, the Bodhisattva Samantabhadra. So it's usually called the King of Aspirations or something, which comes from the Avatamsaka Sutra, and many others. You know, each lineage has their own aspirations that were composed later by Tibetans, but we use many, the aspiration of the Bodhisattva Maitreya, the aspiration of Samantabhadra, many that come from original Indian scriptures. And the fact that these masters spend all the money they can acquire through fundraising to make this possible, and thousands of people, monastics and lay people from all over the world come to these things, is an illustration of how important aspiration is. On a daily basis, at the end of every session, we make aspiration and dedication prayers. Now, dedication and aspiration, while coming often together, are two separate things. The dedication of virtue or merit is the dedication of the force of goodness that you have accumulated during that session. And by extension, you always include all the goodness accumulated by yourself and others throughout past, present, and future to the awakening of all beings. But in connection with that, you can make specific aspirations for other side effects, like, and until they achieve awakening, may all beings have long lives with good health. May poverty, warfare, and famine disappear from this world, and so on. In every lifetime, may I be able to heal beings or protect beings. May I be a bridge for those who wish to cross rivers. May I become medicine for those who are sick. May I become food for those who are hungry. May I become water for those who are thirsty, and so on. These are all aspirations. So aspirations come along with dedications, but they're two distinct things. Now, in terms of your own aspirations for your own practice, yes. And in fact, that's the only way to focus your practice. Trungpa Rinpoche once said that the problem with purification practice and why people don't get the full result of it is that they don't focus. When you make an aspiration, you are focusing. So he said that Vajrasattva practice is like sitting in the sun. But if you're not focused, that's all you're doing. If you focus on your worst problem first, purify this. If you just think, yeah, whatever's wrong with me, purify that, and whatever I did, purify that, and it's too vague. It's too diffused. But if you focus on one thing, your worst defilement, your worst action, then it's like sitting under a magnifying glass in the sun. It is going to burn something. So that is what you want to do, and that's aspiration. So what we need to do in all forms of practice, especially purification practice, is focus on our biggest, most immediate problem first. Whatever is top of the list, the worst problem, whether it's an action that you regret and need to purify, whether it's an emotional problem, whatever is inhibiting you from progressing on the spiritual path, focus on that. Now, it can't be something in the external world that isn't your direct thing. You can't dedicate your virtue to the stock market or something like that. I mean, you could, but then you would end up as a dictator in a future life. So, you have to be careful with aspirations. And there are stories about that in the sutras also.
I have a follow-up question.
From?
Susan Beckley. Is a distinguishing feature of lucid dreaming the ability to direct the dream, change the dream?
Distinguishing?
Is a distinguishing feature of lucid dreaming.
Is this a question or a statement?
It's got a question mark at the end.
So, well, if I understand the question at all, this is the question I'll answer. Let me just say it, because I'm not going to ask you to try to parse the question for me, because we're limited to what I can understand anyway. The ability to know you're dreaming when you're dreaming, what we call lucid dreaming, and the ability to direct or change the dream contents are distinct abilities. It is possible to be comfortably lucid in a dream where you know you're dreaming and you can maintain that awareness, that knowledge comfortably for the duration of the dream. It is possible to have that ability but not be able to manipulate the dream content, the way you want to. Because usually some form of transformation, like multiplying things or changing things and so on, is the next step. And some people find it very easy to move from step 1 to step 2. Other people don't. And again, sometimes it will be easy and sometimes it will be hard or impossible. Okay, next question from the room.
Thank you, Lama Yeshe, for everything. There's so much here that you've presented to us, so I have trouble figuring out what I can ask you about. If you could help address the issue of apathy.
Mm-hmm.
As I understood or tried to interpret what you're saying, apathy seems to fall in between attraction and aversion.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a way to address all three together?
Yes.
Could you talk about that a little
Yes.
bit more? Thank you.
It's presented in Lama Yeshe Dorje, 7 Points of Mind Training, in I think the 3rd point, but I'm often unreliable, so it could be the 4th point, but I think it's the 3rd point. One of the root sentences or phrases is duksum, yusum, duksum, getsasum. 3 objects, 3 poisons, 3 roots of virtue. And this is a tremendously powerful way of, I think of it in North American sports-oriented parlance as an incredibly skillful and powerful way of doing an end run around your kleshas. In the common vehicle, the only answer to the 3 poisons is to let go of them. To remind yourself of the reasons why they're no good and just let it go. In the Mahayana, however, there are skillful means, and it's kind of, it goes to the essence, and this is why I'm using this point to answer your question. It goes to the essence of what makes the 3 poisons poisons. And the answer is very simple: selfishness. The problem, attachment comes from wanting to be happy. Wanting to be happy is good. It is what we call love. Wanting yourself to be happy is loving yourself in a healthy way. Wanting others to be happy and have the causes of happiness is loving others. So there's nothing wrong with wanting yourself to be happy or wanting others to be happy. The problem is the exclusivity of selfishness. It's when we think, I want to be happy and I don't care about anyone else. So selfishness itself includes an element of apathy, even when it's attachment, wanting to be happy. And then we can understand the other 2 in the same way. But to give you the instructions of Lama Yeshe Dorje as explained by Jungwa Lodro Tai, when you experience, let's say, anger, it's easiest to talk about anger because most people are willing to admit that anger is bad. It used to be that you couldn't talk about attachment in the West because if people would think their attachments were good. You know, they called it motivation or loyalty or, you know, this kind of thing or so on. But anyway, so it's safest to stick with anger. When you look at something that you think of as external to yourself, whether it could be a being or it could be an inanimate object, we tend to respond to it, or react to it rather, as I mentioned this morning, with one of these three poisons. We call them poisons because they make us sick and they cause future suffering. So if I see something I want, like when you're thirsty, you want water or a beverage, then, and if you're thirsty enough and you feel insecure about whether that beverage will be there or not, then you can get very, very tight about it. And that's attachment. And then when I see something I don't want, like let's say a scorpion walked up onto this table. It's safe to use scorpions because nobody much likes scorpions. I mean, some of us do in iconography, but they're actually not easy company. And so the traditional thing is, because it's a fear so great that it's actually becomes hatred in a certain way. Like, you know, there's an element of hatred which comes, of course, from fear. So if a scorpion walked up onto my table, crawled up onto my table, I would experience antipathy, to put it mildly, you know. And if there's just nothing particular that, or an object that doesn't particularly affect me one way or the other, like yesterday I used the pretty purple flowers as an example. If there were flowers that for some reason I didn't relate to, that might be apathy. We could take them or leave them, as we say. So the three objects are what we want, what we don't want, and what we don't care about. The three poisons are the thought, I want this, I don't want this, and I don't care about this. The three roots of virtue, which are how the end run, so to speak, happens, are this. Although in the common vehicle, when we recognize a klesha, we think this is not okay, this is going to make me sick and cause me future problems, I have to just let go of it. In this technique, we don't try to let go of it. We accept it. We say, okay, I'm angry, or I hate this scorpion, or, you know, I don't know, I hate the wallpaper, it could be. Okay, fine. I'm not going to fight that. I accept that I am experiencing antipathy, dislike, anger, hatred, whatever. But through my acceptance, and there has to be something to dedicate, and the virtue is you're accepting the existence of your klesha, which is unpleasant, in place of others. Say, through my willingly accepting may no being ever have to experience what this unpleasant sensation of anger. And you have to experience the unpleasantness of it. So the unpleasantness of attachment is when you want something you don't have. It could also be when you have something but you're afraid of losing it. Any of the sufferings, there has to be a quality of suffering. And it's not masochistic. It's simply that you say, by the power of my willingness to accept this, if it may serve instead of the suffering of others, may no being ever have to experience anger or attachment or apathy again. And in apathy, you can also include the suffering of fatigue, of being dull, of being out of it, or if you realize that your apathy is an active obstacle to living the life you want to live. And by making it not about you, because the poisonous quality of the three poisons is not the attachment, the hatred, or the apathy per se. It's the all about me-ness of it. It's the selfishness, it's the exclusivity, you know. That's why the 16th Karmapa said, yes, Buddha has an ego. The Buddha's ego is all sentient beings. No exclusivity, you know. And that's the way to deal with all three together. Because in a sense, each of the three contains the elements of the others. We experience aversion because whatever we are averse to is preventing us from getting what we want. And so therefore aversion automatically includes some kind of attachment. And we experience selfish aversion and attachment because we are apathetic about the needs of others.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank Lama Yeshe Gyamtso and Jungkong Kongtrul the Great. Yes, please.
This is from Daniel Choi.
Choi. Daniel Choi.
When receiving pointing out instructions, and we feel as if the instructions are merely confirming what we've experienced, how do we ensure that's genuine recognition and not delusion?
Go to the teacher who gave you the pointing out instruction and check. Yeah, when you're engaged in that level of practice where pointing out instructions are given, it is the responsibility of the teacher, and all great masters do this, to give students a chance to individually check on their understanding and progress. That's done. I know that the great masters from His Holiness Sutta Rinpoche on down all do this at that level. Do we have any here, or should we let Jeff? Okay, go ahead, Jeff.
Daniel just gave you
Okay.
prayer hands. Susan gave you a thumbs up on lucid dreaming.
Okay, thank you.
This is from Prajnakaya. There's two in a row here. I'll read them both.
Kaya. Sherabji-ku. That's a strange one. Sometimes what happens is people whom I've known for a long time use funny names. I mean, I use a funny name. I use a Tibetan name, and I'm not Tibetan. But use funny names to disguise themselves because they're worried that I will have thing. I think Prajnakaya or one of those strange names turned out to be the guy from, what's his name? He was in Toronto. I forget. Anyway, whoever, I'll answer it anyway if I can. I'd like to know who it is, not because I'm mean. Well, there's that too. But the real reason is because if I know many of these people, and so I know what their knowledge base is, and so I can make use of their strengths and prior things. So
They've been helping me with my...
Peter Elias.
Oh,
I think it might be Peter
oh,
Elias.
is that Peter? Oh,
Is it?
good call.
Yeah.
Not trying to disguise myself, he
Okay.
says. And he's been helping me notice AV things. Thanks,
Yeah,
Peter.
yeah. He's been doing
Okay.
AV for a long time.
He asks, all the dissolution stage practices that I have been exposed to as the deity or guru dissolving into oneself. Yet it is oneself who dissolves into the guru or deity in the bardo. Are there any practices that use this directionality in the dissolution stage?
Yes, I can immediately think of two. In the preliminaries of the embodiment of three jewels, at the end of the refuge and prostration practice, you dissolve into Guru Rinpoche. He doesn't dissolve into you. And in the Guru Yoga of the Longchen Yingtik preliminary practices, you dissolve into Guru Rinpoche. He doesn't dissolve into you. So yes, there are. Next question.
Thank you, Lamala, for very clear instructions. I might be blabbering with my question.
Okay.
When you talk about awareness of awareness,
Yes.
or resting in awareness, how do you distinguish it? You're not getting into the trance state,
Uh-huh.
and then also there's a sense of observer,
Yes.
and that gets subtle, but how do you know, how do you let go of that subtle observer?
Well, those are two different problems. The trance state problem occurs when there isn't actually awareness, where this is why, that's a very good and important question. I'm glad you asked it. This is why they describe awareness of awareness in two ways. Sometimes they say rest in awareness, and sometimes they say look at awareness. When they say rest in awareness, they're trying to avoid the problem of the observer. So you avoid the problem of the observer by not thinking of it as observation. The observer is imaginary. Awareness is not imaginary. It may be dependent, it may be real, but it's not imaginary. The observer is imaginary because there is no split there. We create a false split. So if you find that the problem is with a sense of an observer, a watcher, a looker, then stop thinking of it as observation. Think of it as resting. And then when resting, if you find that there is a problem with it becoming a trance state, a kind of a lack of full consciousness, then stop thinking of it as resting and think of it as observation. So it's kind of a process of adjustment.
But how do you differentiate between resting in awareness versus trance state?
There is, once you've experienced both, you can tell the difference. In the trance state, you're not experiencing anything. It's a vacuity, it's an absence. In the awareness of awareness, as it's been explained to me, there is a
I mean, there's a
You will
quality
know.
of
you will know. I don't
being
want to say
vibrant or very
Yeah.
clear.
Yeah. I don't want to say more. I don't want to say what I was going to say because other people here have different issues. And I don't want to ignite their issues by solving your issues. And this is why at some point when you're engaged in meditation at the level that it sounds like you are, you also need to consult with, in our case, someone like Lama Trotop, who really, really knows his stuff. And if you can get to see him individually, then he can really, because I'm okay at teaching a group of people, because I'm mostly repeating things that I've heard, and I can add my own experience as far as it goes. But when it gets to really fine-tuning these things, it has to be individual, and the person who does it has to be really expert. And I would suggest you bring those questions to Lama Trotop, or someone else of the same caliber. Yes.
Again from Susan Beckley.
I don't know who Susan Beckett is. Do I know Susan Beckett? What?
Beckley.
Beckley. I must know her by sight, but not by name. Okay.
Oh, she just said that answers my question.
Okay. Good.
Whatever that was.
Minjaram She calls that buy one, get one free. Okay. So then, do you have any others?
No, I have none.
Okay. Any others here? Michael, you said you had a number of things that you wanted to ask. Now would be your chance. Okay.
Thank you again, Lama Yeshe. I'll try to. Let me try this. So I've been to a number of talks and discussions on Dharma. I get confused when I hear the term appearances.
Yes.
Could you
Yes.
say something
Yes.
about that?
And my answer is going to make it worse.
I'm ready.
Although if you push them on it, they'll say, no, we don't disagree. In scholarly texts, it is evident in the writings of Longzhenpa, the omniscient Longzhenpa, the omniscient Jigme Lingpa, and in the 20th century, the great Khenpo Gangsha. So in these Dzogchen masters, these indisputably great Dzogchen masters, that they use the word nangwa, which is what I often translate as appearances, to mean projections. So what we project onto the screen and because and I'm sure if great Nyingma scholars listen to this, they'll argue with me about this, but because they make a very clear distinction, starting from, I'm sure he wasn't the first to say it, but the first really great Tibetan scholar, writer, Siddha, he was kind of everything. From the time of Longzhenpa onward, in the heart essence tradition and in other branches of the Nyingma school, a very clear distinction is made between nangwa, appearances or projection, and nangwe yul, or the objects that appear. And so, as Kenshin, and this comes from Kenshin Trungpa Rinpoche's explanation of this. According to what Kenshin Trungpa Rinpoche told me, the statement is that nangwa are within and of the mind. I don't think they would go so far as to say our mind, but you could if you wanted to be rough. But they're not rough. They're very, very clear, because clear distinction is one of the special features of the Dzogchen teachings. It's Shenje, Lada, Rongdro, Ngonsum de Tomba. The four special features of Dzogchen are clear distinctions or differentiation, such as between Dharmakaya and the all basis and so on. Shenje, Lada, transcendence, or we could say, some teachers have said the leap, or here we'll say transcendence. Rongdru, self-liberation, which we also find, of course, in the Mahamudra tradition, and Ngunsum de Tompa, revealing things in direct experience. So, and there kind of is a sequence there, so we have to start with the clear distinctions. And the distinction between Nangwa and Nangwe Yul is that, as and Jigme Lingpa writes about this even in his Treasury of Qualities, which can be, I think it's considered generally acceptable to read that without having had instructions on it. So it was translated with Kunzang Rinpoche's commentary by the Padmakara translation group, because it does deal with Dzogchen, but it's mostly not about Dzogchen. You should not read any text about Dzogchen that is you have not formally received. It just didn't turn out well. So he says that those who fail to make the distinction between Nangwa and Nangwe Yul are, he says, Palang Zil, he says they're dumber than cowboys. And I don't mean that there's anything wrong with cowherds. I mean, there was a great Siddha, Goraksha, who was a cowherd, and is actually the origin of one Buddhist tradition and one Advaita Vedanta tradition that both come from the same person. But don't tell anybody, because the Buddhists get very upset about that. But, the distinction he's making, according to the first Dodrupchen's brief commentary, which is not the one that's been translated, is that, when I look at Bardor Rinpoche's throne table, I see what I see, which is I know a function of my senses and my affect, which is part of my Nangwa, my projections on it. I like it. It makes me sad because Rinpoche is not here. It makes me happy because I remember him. All of this stuff, right? All of that is Nangwa. Everything from what I see visually or think I see, which is a function of my physical organ of vision, species, brain settings, and so on. At lunch, Jim and I were talking about color blindness, so maybe I don't actually see exactly the same colors as other people. So that's all Nangwa, and no one would argue with that that is my Nangwa, that is individual. But the Nangwe Yul, the object that appears to me, which we can analyze however we want, a group of objects, several layers of brocade and the table underneath and all that kind of stuff. If we fail to make a distinction between the Nangwa, what I see, and the Nangwe Yul, then that creates endless logical problems. Because that means that when I close my eyes, that thing should disappear in everyone's perception. But it doesn't. It only disappears in my perception and reappears as soon as I open my eyes. It also disappears if I turn this way, but it's still there. So, the Nangwe Yul is not a function of my mind. To assert that the Nangwe Yul is a function of my mind is solipsistic. When he says you're dumber than a cowboy, he says lungzile or something, he means solipsism. Because cowboys are smart enough not to be solipsistic, because they've got cattle to herd and stuff like that, you know. I think it's cowboy, maybe it's sheep herder, but it just sounds, in American parlance, it's dumber than a cowboy. Especially since Tom and I were talking about the really good cowboy shows, westerns they had in the early days of television, like Wagon Train and so on. Anyway, so those guys wouldn't have made that mistake. No siree. No, Ward Bond would not have made the mistake of mixing up Nangwa and Nangwe Yul. So in a Nyingma context, there are grounds for translating Nangwa as projection rather than appearance. But it does include appearance because it includes what appears to me. It's not only projection into how I feel about it. It's not only. I don't know about other branches of the Kaju. You know, I looked a little bit at the root text of the Drikung Kaju, the Gongchik, but which I had not received. I bought it at a lovely Drikung Tibetan bookstore in Majnu Katila in Delhi. But because I hadn't received it formally, I was curious because Garchen Rinpoche is so amazing, and it's like, it makes you curious. I mean, you meet these great masters from all these different schools. It makes you enthusiastic about their traditions of origin. Anyway, so I don't know, but I know that in what I've been given of the Karma Kaju tradition, that basically there is an emphasis on recognizing the degree to which things are not other than mind. I wouldn't want to misrepresent that. I think sometimes when people dispute the Karma Kaju view, they're setting it up as a straw man. They're not giving it its authentic explanation. But certainly there are differences in usage. So when translating Mahamudra, I tend to say appearances, and when translating Dzogchen, and they say Nangwa, unless it's talking about, that thing that we don't talk about, that thing, the Dzogchen practice, then of course Nangwa is different. Then it's really appearances. But if we're talking about ordinary appearances, then it's almost got a quality of projections. And the evidence for that is that Trungpa Rinpoche used to use the English word projection a lot to talk about Nangwa.
So were they ever talking interchangeably between Nangwa and Nangwe Yul?
No, I think that what Trungpa Rinpoche said was that Trungpa Rinpoche's opinion, as he expressed it at that time, and this was in the late 90s, he said that he felt personally, now whether this is a standard Karma Kaju position or not, I don't know, because ontology is very hard to track down. Once you get into the Mahayana, the whole notion of ontology becomes a little bit tricky. He said he felt that Longchenpa's insistence about a clear distinction between Nangwa and Nangwe Yul was a concession to the needs of disciples And he said that, because he quoted Longchenpa as saying, Nangwa sem yin, nangwa yul sem min. If I remember correctly, which was, and I hope I do, because this is an important point, that appearances are mind, but the objects that appear are not mind. And we can use the word appearances here. We don't have to retreat to the use of projections. He said he felt that ultimately both are mind, but that it's certainly much harder to see that the objects that appear are mind. And so that he felt he said it was a legitimate way to put it, but Trungpa Rinpoche said that he thought it was a concession to the needs of disciples. Adherents of the heart essence tradition as their primary practice and lineage of origin today, whom I've spoken to about this, say they disagree. And then there's this funny phenomenon, this class of people who are the Karma Kajupas who are thoroughly trained in Dzogchen. And examples of these are Khenpo Jurme and Khenpo Kunga of Tergar Monastery in Nepal. And their practical training is in Dzogchen, their philosophical training is Karma Kaju. So their way of formulating the view is not exactly, it's, you know, there'll be things where they say, well, they say that, and they say that, but we say this. And so it's, you know, we have to be very, very careful when we parse views in not assuming homogeneity of at least the way things are put on the one hand, and also not making too much out of disparity in terminology on the other. There was a famous Gelugpa scholar who argued, who wrote 3 refutations of Mipam's works that were a response to some points made by an earlier Gelugpa scholar. I forget his name. It's in that book by Machiu Rikad on Palchen Rinpoche called Enlightened Vagabond. I'd heard the story orally before, but I'd forgotten his name. A buddy? No, not that. Anyway, I forget his name. Anyway, he later said that he wrote his first response to Mipam, his first argument, as an honest disputation. The second one he wrote in praise of Mipam, to make sure that Mipam's works were better known, because people would read him first, and then they'd go on to read Mipam. So he wrote it, he said he wrote the second one basically as praise and advertisement for Mipam. And he said he wrote the third one in devotion to his guru. So by that point, Mipam had become his guru. So, you know, again, like I said, I mean, Dzongkhala Drtai, when writing about Mahamudra, would put things in a very Mahamudric way, and when writing about Dzogchen, would put things in a very Dzogchen-y way. And probably when writing about the other, because there are 8 different practice lineages, each with their own, you know, traditions. I mean, Chu was one and had, it's not we don't think of it as an independent lineage now simply because everybody wants to practice Chu. There's no lineage of Tibetan Buddhism that doesn't practice Chu, because it's amazing, as it said about Chu, you know, if practiced alone as your only practice, it is all sufficient. If practiced as a supplement to other practices, it will fit well with any. So So the reason why Chu is not a separate lineage, why you don't have the Chu Dharma Center on 5th Street and so on, is because everybody does it. Same thing kind of happened to the Shangpa Kagyu a little bit, because both the Karma Kagyu and the Gelugpa and also the Jorangpas adopted the Shangpa Kagyu practices, then the Shangpa Kagyu sort of ceased to have its own monasteries. So there are actually 8 practice lineages, not 4. And the ones that were ironically the most popular have sort of become absorbed in a certain way. But each of them has their own terminology, and you have to be careful. So since great masters like Jang Chense Wompo and Jungulutu Tai, the third Jalwan Karmapa Rongjun Dorje earlier, since they wrote about different things, these different traditions, and were careful in each to respect the terminology and viewpoints of each, then you can actually find bits where you could think of them arguing against themselves, but they're not really. It's fun.
Thank you.
Okay, good.
Thank you, Lama. I want to ask about thinking about appearances. When one is in looking at the nature of your mind, and you see thoughts come in and then go away. As you progress, will the nature of thoughts change in terms of either the way they appear or content? And will the appearances of waking, when you're post-meditation, do those alter, and if not, why not?
Before I answer your question, let me ask for a specification. When you say, will the appearances of the waking state in post-meditation alter, do you mean alter in content or alter in quality?
Both.
Both, okay. So these are very important questions, particularly because we, in our traditions, speak so much of pure appearances and sacred outlook and seeing everything as the deity, seeing everything as the guru, and so on. Earlier, I quoted His Holiness Sutra Rinpoche as saying, right behind me, saying that during the time of Gampopa, he had been Gampopa's nephew, Dakpo Gomsul, when Bardor Rinpoche was Jalwa Barompa, the founder of the Barom Kagyu, and Gampopa's attendant. And because he was trying to make it clear, he was giving an empowerment and a blessing, and was it an empowerment or was it anyway, he was giving a blessing, and he wanted to point out the depth of his relationship and the duration and intimacy of his long-term relationship with Rinpoche. I mention that now because I'm going to quote Dakpo Gomsul. I'm going to quote Gampopa's nephew. And again, as often, I'm following Khenchen Trungpa Rinpoche in this. When drawing, this will not answer your question, but it will form the basis for my answer. When drawing a distinction between or a remark about the relationship, or you could say non-distinction, between the mind per se, the mind itself, and thoughts, Lord Gampopa himself famously said, no, not thoughts, appearances, sorry. Gampopa famously said, used the terms, semnyi lenchik chepe chujiku, mind itself, mind per se, the connate or co-emergent Dharmakaya. So you can think of it as a phrase or as a sentence by adding the verb, mind itself is co-emergent Dharmakaya. And co-emergent in the Mahamudra usage means that you can think of it as meaning it's always been there. So as long as we have been ignorant, our wisdom, the co-emergent Dharmakaya, has always been there. So then we talk about co-emergent ignorance and co-emergent wisdom, or co-emergent Dharmakaya. And in apposition, not opposition, but apposition to that, Gampopa also said or used the term, as Trungpa Rinpoche quoted it, Nangwa lenjik chepe chuku u. Nangwa, which we can just use the Tibetan, because, appearances, I say appearances, are the light of the co-emergent Dharmakaya. Now, according to Trungpa Rinpoche, and he said this many times that I was interpreting for him, and so this must have been a point that he wished to emphasize or reinforce. Initially, Gampopa just put those two things. I mean, Gampopa, of course, wrote incredible amounts and said incredible things and taught an incredible amount that we probably don't have, but he emphasized those two things. Semni, lenjik chepe chuchiku, and nawa, lenjik chepe chuku vu, the light of the co-emergent Dharmakaya. But Trungpa Rinpoche went on to say, Dagpo Gomsul, Gampopa's nephew, who inherited from him the monastery, the root monastery of Dakla Gampo. Because the other disciples, like Barompa and the first Jawan Karmapa, Dusun Jenpa, and Pamo Drupa, and Saltong Shogom, who's now Tralag Rinpoche, they all went off and went into retreat, and then eventually founded their own things, or students surrounded them and basically said, teach us, and eventually they did. So Gomtsul, Dagpo Gomtsul, his name was Tsotrim Nyingpo, but everyone was called Gom this, Gom that, because the meditator, Tsotrim Nyingpo. Gom means meditation, in this case, meditator. And so he added Namtok Lenjik Chepe Chuku Tsal. Thoughts, Vikalpa, Namto, are the display of the co-emergent Dharmakaya. So with the advent of Gomtsul's contribution, in this basic formulation, we have three things. We have the co-emergent Dharmakaya, mind itself, which we can call the ground of being, the unchanging ground of being, Buddha nature, all those things. Then we have Nangwa, which is the light, and hence the idea of projection, And don't forget also that the word Nangwa can also mean light. Like Amitabha, Buddha Amitabha, which is boundless, Amita, Abba, light, is translated into Tibetan in two different ways. One is Pame. Is light. Pame means immeasurable. So Amita. And the other one is Nangwa, for Abba, light. Taye, endless, for Amita. So Nangwa has the connotation of light anyway, and perhaps of projection. And then with Gomtsul's contribution, we have the Tsal, Lenchik chepe chuku tsal. So, the display, what it allows. The tsal of something is not exactly the thing itself, but it is not outside the thing. So, for example, clouds are the tsal of the sky. The image on a television screen is the tsal of the screen. Waves are the tsal of the ocean. In Milarepa's words, I think trees are the tsal of the hillside or mountainside, and so on. And does that answer your question? Not fully. Okay, and then...
But maybe there's not...
Well, there's the difficult point of... So what we're taught, to use the sutra approach, is that an Arya, so somebody who has achieved the first, in the Mahayana, the first bodhisattva level on up, that the wisdom of the recognition of absolute truth in even placement is, that is there. But in post-meditation, for a bodhisattva as opposed to Buddha, appearances still arise, but they arise like a magical illusion. Then with the Vajrayana, we have the additional question of, okay, so appearances arise like a magical illusion. For a Vajrayana bodhisattva, do they see the same shapes and colors that we do? Or do they literally see deities and palaces and so on? Then the best source of an answer to that, I cannot answer it because it's so subtle, because the question of the division, the borderline between quality and content is so subtle that I would refer you to Mipam's Beacon of Certainty. Ideally with the Khenpo Kunpel commentary, but that's not been translated. So you can read it. John Pettit, the translator John Pettit, translated it many years ago. There's probably a copy in the library. Lama Trotop regards it as highly secret because Khenpo Achu would only teach it when he taught the highest wisdom as a background text for it. Trungpa Rinpoche encouraged me to read it and actually lent me his copy years ago before it occurred to me that it was highly secret. But he addresses this question. And I would refer you to him. And Mipam wrote the Beacon of Certainty at the age of, he was either 8 or he was 15. And he was uncertain about certain things. So he prayed to Manjushri. So he saw Manjushri, and I forget whether Manjushri dissolved into him at that time or just told him the answers, or he just saw Manjushri and he knew the answers. But anyway, these are the answers that Manjushri gave Mipam to those questions. So have at it.
I'm not there yet, but thank you.
On that note, it's 4:02. We should conclude. Thank you all very much. I've enjoyed this a great deal. I hope that some of what I said was helpful. Most of what will be helpful, however, is you're reviewing and studying the text to the degree that you find it helpful. The difficulty, of course, with this text is its density. It's very, very brief and assumes a certain amount of prior knowledge and or verbal guidance. Like, for example, when he says the white sphere, the red sphere, and the blue sphere, he gives you the terms, but he doesn't exactly explain. He gives you them in the right order, but he doesn't exactly explain at what point to actually move from one to the next. So, consult Lama Trotop about the with this material, with anything that comes from directly from Terchen Barway Dorje, the authority here and anywhere now, with his grandfather's passing and Bardor Rinpoche's passing, the ultimate human living authority is our Lama Chartop. He knows more about this stuff than anyone else who's alive that I have heard of. So any questions, ask him. Because if he can't answer it, nobody can. So we'll chant the full dedication starting on page 7. Sunam de ye dam je zemba nye do ne nye be ranam pam je ne jenga na je ba la dromba ye simben zo le ro wa jo ge wa de yin je wong gun sanam ye je zon zon de sanam ye je le jong we amba guan ye dong ba zhou zhang zhu zhen de ren bo je ma je ba nan je zhu je jian ba nyam ba me ba dong gong ne gong du bao ba zhou sem jen dam je de dan den jo je ngen ro dam je dan do dong pa zhou zhang zhu zhen ba gan da za zhou ba den da guan je ma lan zhou ba zhou sang je ring je ze zhen dam pe gar zhang guan de sha do do leng ba ye zam je me zhong de bu song a je si xin zhong da zhang be da zhi zhong. Thank you all. See you all soon. That's a big gata. Here, let me move that. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, is that one? Here you go. Did I? Here, it's 2. Come on. I'm giving you that one too. Come on. Jeez. People are so difficult. Thank you. Have a safe drive home. See you in 3 weeks. Yeah, thank you, and thank you for the lovely chocolate. Do you have a lift home? Who's taking you home?
Haven't figured that out yet. I haven't looked.
Yeah, make sure that she doesn't leave until you. Okay, good. Yeah, that's why I brought it up.
Your detail is amazing.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Always a pleasure for me too. See you soon.
Thank you.
Be well.
Someday I'll know it all.
Someday we'll all know it all.
Oh, and by the way,
Yes.
you'll be a sage when you're 80.
Well, I hope so.
Patience.
One way or the other. Thank you. Thank you. Be well. Thank you. Thank you. Get home safe. And thank you. Thank you. See you soon. Very soon.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
I can have the world's smallest cup.
That's cool.
I know, it's like, do they make baby cups?
I'll tell you a funny story
Thank you for
sometime.
wonderful teaching. You're amazing.
Thank you. Well, that's the text. It's not me. Thank you, boss.
30 people were online
Oh, good.
this whole weekend.
Nice. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you. Get home safe. Thank you. Thank you. I guess you're driving, so I should have said get home safe to you, too. Thank you so much for everything. Okay, I'll see you soon. Thank you, everybody. Oh, yeah. Oh.